starting to pop up some new ways of being, new ways of living. And I just feel in my heart of hearts that as the destruction happens, that something else is already immediately going to be there to kind of help us not go into too much, fear and chaos.
I've got a wonderful guest on with me today, Laurie Lyons from
Hi.
Austin, the metro area there. Welcome, Laurie. It's wonderful to be talking with you today.
Wonderful to talk to you too, Paul. Thank you for having me.
And, you're a level 3 practitioner, QHHT practitioner.
Yes.
How long have you been practicing for?
Well, I've been a level 3 for about 2.5 years, but I've been practicing since late 2015.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
Emphasize that word. Isn't it funny that we use the word practice? And because we're always learning, isn't it? And I kind of like that, that phrase, because even Dolores herself would be learning from every single client that she would work with. And I think I think when we're always in learning mode, it keeps us humble, and it also keeps us open to new things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Kind of when we take a journalistic approach, it kind of takes us out of ego, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I like that word journalistic, because that was exactly how Dolores would describe herself. She was the reporter, and she was not the one bringing the information. She was only reporting on what she was hearing through her clients. It's a great way to understand how these sessions work, is that we merely report, we merely facilitate a process which is quite special. Mm-hmm. For our audience that's not that familiar with QHHT, would you maybe give them an intro in exactly how sessions work?
Sure. It's the best way I know how to do it when people call and inquire is to kind of explain the process, right? And to kind of piggyback on what you just said, I love this modality because it empowers the client 100% to do their own healing. We're not the healers, and that is the most beautiful thing to see when it happens, right?
Yeah. Well, even the oldest spiritual traditions have always said that the power is within. And I think this is a perfect demonstration of practically showing someone that the truth of that, because all of the answers really are inside, aren't they? And it's just having the right mechanisms to get in contact with that information that's within us.
I agree. Absolutely. So yes. And we are closer as a collective to our higher selves than ever before as part of this great awakening. So
I'm glad you mentioned that. Let's touch on that, because that was one of the main things I wanted to ask you today. Is a lot of people, certainly where I'm here in Australia, where we're seeing a lot of extreme unfoldings around us, and it's got a lot of people concerned. Some people call it the takeover or whatever language they use. But how do you see the Great Awakening happening for humanity?
Ooh, whoa, that's a big question. How do I see it happening for humanity? I think that it's happening with all the chaos going on. But also I believe that we have help with otherworldly beings helping us and projecting positive energy and whatever type of technology that they have that we're not aware of at this time, and helping people wake up. It's like, you know, I'm seeing every day with my clients, they're just all of a sudden that veil just kind of disappears, and they're like, oh, I never saw the world like this before, you know. And it can be quite disconcerting, you know, for clients and the people around me. But
Yeah.
it's
It's certainly exciting, and I know Dolores. You know, I'm not sure if many of you have read any of Dolores Cannon's books, and you can actually get them on audio version now, most of them, which is great if you're one that doesn't have the time to physically read stuff. You can actually listen to the information. But I know, Laurie, you've probably read most, if not all, of Dolores's books. What do
not all
you?
of them.
Not all of them?
But I should.
Well,
But
there's a lot of them. So
yeah, I've been waiting for them to come out
and
on Audible. Since my awakening, I have a very difficult time sitting down and physically reading anymore. And I used to be the other way around. And now I have to listen to books. Of course, I can read, but but it's so tedious now. It's very heavy. I don't know a better word other than kind of tedious and heavy to sit down and turn the page and read. It's so much easier to absorb the information now when you're listening, and I think there's something about that. Do you know? Do you
yeah,
know what
no,
I mean?
you know, I'm on exactly the same page as you
Yeah.
there, with what you're saying, because I used to read, you know, traditionally, and now
Mm,
I listen to a lot of the books I consume. I think it's a combination of things. I think that we live in a really fast-paced society now,
mhm,
um, and we're programmed, if that's the right word, to consume media kind of visually and audibly being key here. And I think
mhm,
that, you know, there's just that audio connection that you get.
mhm,
What I do each night, I often will listen to a book as I fall off to sleep, and I'll put it on a timer, and
mhm.
I'll drift off into unconsciousness through the practice of listening to something. And to be honest with you, I do this with many of Dolores's books. I think it's a great way to go into the subconscious
I
with
agree.
positive information, because, you know, they say the last thing you kind of hear or see or focus on before you go into unconsciousness is the thing that will dominate
Mhm.
in the sleep state. So it's interesting, that a lot of these great messages can now be available on an audio form, so that can happen for people. That's just a
Yeah,
little thing I do.
I do too.
Right, yeah, well, there we go.
Hypnotizing ourselves.
Yeah, so I know people use, you know, sleep meditation and stuff like that, but that's kind of my thing that I do.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, it's interesting. What's one of the, just as we're talking about Dolores's books, what do you have a favorite book that maybe has touched your life more profoundly out of her book series?
The Three Waves of Volunteers, and one that the first one I read was Five Lives Remembered, and I will never forget that book. That was
Yeah,
just that was
I've
sort of
read.
my opening to everything, you know.
Yeah, great,
Yeah.
both great books. I would probably have to agree
Uh-huh.
with you on the Three Waves of Volunteers, because that's certainly a book that I've read only recently, because she's made it available on an audio form.
Hmm.
Actually, I'll talk to you a little bit about that. I'm not sure how recently you've read that book or what you recall, but I was listening to it a couple of weeks back, and there was a few things that really struck me in the language that has been described in those books about current times of what we're sort of moving through with the pandemic. And
Hmm.
I just thought it was quite phenomenal because the books were written more than 10 years ago, and they were almost describing in detail what we're going through right now. So I'd encourage the audience to get hold of that book, and I'll leave a link in the description for that. You can get it at audible.com, and it's a great read, and it has so much relevance to what we're going through right now. But back to that question on the Great Awakening, what are some of the things that you're seeing around you in your life, and maybe even through clients that would present, maybe, if the right word is, evidence of this starting to unfold and manifest in the world?
Yeah. I'd like to start with a personal experience I had.
Right. Yeah.
And I'll try to give you the Reader's Digest version. But I woke up one Saturday morning, realized I didn't have any clients that day because somebody had made rescheduled. And I was just so happy that morning. I woke up, I was blissful, I was in my high vibing place, and I decided I'm going to go to the farmer's market, to the local farmer's market here, and get amongst people. And it was a pretty sunny day, and so I went. And as I was walking, I was in my blissful state. And as I was walking down the walkway, there's vendors on each side, I noticed that people were kind of running into me, or they didn't see me, and I was trying to catch the eye of some people and wave and smile because I was just feeling so good that day. I felt like I was walking on air. And then I came on an incline, and I was kind of at the top, and people were walking this way. And I noticed how strange it was that I noticed that the sea of people were kind of in this gray aura. It was so strange. And then I noticed there was a vendor to my side on my periphery who kind of lit up. And I looked over at him, and he smiled and waved at me. And I waved back, and then I was walking ahead again, and I noticed that I was lit up like he was. So this was weird.
Wow.
And I just noticed that very few people, maybe a handful of people, noticed me. It's like they recognized me, they waved. I didn't know them. But this sea of people, it was very odd. They were all kind of like in a hive, and they were in this gray kind of aura, is the best way I know how to explain it. So kind of freaked me out. And,
Yeah.
And this wonderful little Hispanic lady waved at me, and she said, "Do you like tamales?" And I said, "Oh, I love tamales." So I went over there and I bought a couple of tamales, and I decided, I think I'm going home because this is really weird. I feel like I was in some kind of twilight zone. And it took me a day or two to kind of process it. And I'm going, okay, my higher self says, this is what it's like to be in higher consciousness. This is what it's like to be on the new earth. That feeling of just bliss and happiness and joy, not a care in the world, is what it feels like. So I'm excited that I got a glimpse of that.
Yeah. So do you think then that people, and I've certainly heard this before, but I'd love to hear what your take is. Do you think people are starting to experience these kind of events almost like a trickle in effect of what is to come?
I think so.
Yeah.
And I kind of figured you might ask me a couple of questions like this, and I'd like to share with you. I did have a client that I need to put her YouTube video up. I haven't done it yet, but she went into a future life in the new earth, and it was so amazing. And she was, let's see, she was experiencing herself becoming acclimated to the new earth. And so, what was interesting is in this lifetime that she was experiencing on the new earth, she had a mentor who taught her how to travel with just without directions, and to find her through her thoughts and projecting those thoughts and aligning with her mentor's frequency all simultaneously. So what she explained to me is she was walking down a cobblestone street, but she also saw many different pathways, and she would stop and use her intuition and go left, you know, then she'd go right, and she would hear the thoughts of her mentor, I don't know, projecting out her own frequency is the only way I know how to explain it. And she found her mentor without directions, walking through a city.
Wow. Yeah.
So, yeah.
And
So,
it is amazing to see how, I think, the way I see it is as our vibration is increasing, we're noticing, we're beginning to be on a different frequency. And with that frequency comes kind of a new connection with the world around us. And I'm certainly seeing this in my own life. Just, I think I'd explain it on an intuitive level where intuition is a lot sharper than maybe it has been before. And we
yes.
can almost predict, certain events in our own lives, where we can feel, really intuitively like something is about to happen. I don't know if you're experiencing this, but I tell you what, I'm experiencing intuitively that we're right on the precipice of something big happening. Now, I know a lot of people say, oh, I've heard all these sort of comments before, but really intuitively, I sense where I don't know, I can't articulate exactly what that is, but I do believe that we are really about to face an event that's going to bring about big change in the world around us. Is that resonating with you? Are you hearing anything on something coming?
I am. A solar flash, I hear about that. And
Yeah.
of course, none of us really know what that's going to look like or feel like. And another thing that I remember from a couple of clients, they confirmed each other and they didn't even know each other. So that was pretty cool. Uh, is that all of this dissension and divisiveness and chaos and destruction that's going on right now,
Mm.
I'm hoping this is true, that beginning around the winter solstice of this year and on into January, upcoming January, is when things are going to begin to calm down
Yeah.
a little bit. So I'm hearing that, and that a lot of machinations in our world is crumbling, and up is going to pop up some new ways of being, new ways of living. And I just feel in my heart of hearts that as the destruction happens, that something else is already immediately going to be there to kind of help us not go into too much, fear and chaos.
Yeah. Well, that's a good, thing to pick up on this next question, because I think certainly here in Australia, as I know you probably hear through the news, we're going through
Yes.
some pretty intense stuff with government corruption, maybe, just some dark negative stuff I think most people can see.
Yeah.
So we're kind of holding the line, if you like, for some good stuff to come. And I
Yes.
certainly resonate with what you're saying, is that
Good.
I think there's going to be a turning point here. I don't know what the catalyst is necessarily, but I know there's one coming, and I know this is going to shift directions. But I think the question I have is that a lot of people are in a lot of fear because they're living, it's not something they're projecting, but they are living in the present moment, a lot of these dark realities around them, and you know, limits on their travel and ostracization, maybe even segregation for a lot of people I'm seeing. So there is a lot of fear. How would you advise one to, if they are consumed with that kind of reality that they're living, how would you advise that they get on a more positive, or have confidence in a positive trajectory?
First of all, they need to buy your book.
Well, it's free, so they don't have to buy
Okay.
it.
Listen to your book.
Yeah.
I listened to it, and it certainly brought me into a higher vibration, and I love it. So congratulations.
Well,
It's a wonderful
I'm
piece of
glad you
work.
mentioned that, because I specifically was told to put this book together as
Mhm.
an audio book rather than a written book, and that they showed me that it would have a vibrational effect on those that listen to it. So it wasn't necessarily the content, but it was the energy in which it was being transmitted to people. So I've encouraged people to re-listen to that, because a lot of things can't be taught, they're rather caught. And this is a
Yes.
tangible thing that is caught. I actually get the same thing when I
Mhm.
listen to Dolores's books.
Me too.
And that is why sometimes I'll be half asleep when I'm listening to the content, but it's the energy in which the content is being distributed. And a lot of spiritual frequency work is based on this premise of
Right.
catching something tangibly rather than it being all about the content itself. So yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. And for anyone that hasn't got that, I'll leave a link as well in the
Good.
description, so you can get your free copy of that. And I encourage you to listen to that and get into that vibration, because I think, you know, we have responsibility, don't we, Laurie, to get into, or to raise rather, our own vibration. You know, that is a responsibility that we have, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I was just going to say, you're a hypnotist also.
Yeah.
And we learned, through our education, in that how important it is to not only really believe in what you're doing,
Mm.
but you are projecting that energy through the through the vibrations of your voice when you are doing your work, when you're speaking to them. And
Yeah,
you know
absolutely.
you're in that script, and you're holding that space with them, and when their eyes are shut and they're listening, that's why I always say, it's not so much the words I'm saying, listen to the sound of my voice.
Yeah.
And of course the words are there, but that, listen to the energy and the sound of my voice. And that's what you're saying to me, that's what I'm hearing, is the you truly believe in what you're doing good work. And um it emanates from your soul when you speak. And that's what people need to hear, and it's going to raise a lot of people's vibrations.
Yeah, and that's a question I have for you. What is meditation something that you practice daily in your own personal life to help you?
I do. Mindfulness meditation. Um, I've done some mindfulness meditation coaching,
Oh,
and
great.
I
Okay.
find how it's so helpful for those clients that you love to call those with the monkey mind. The ones
Yeah.
that it's so much chatter in their mind they can't turn it off, and not meant to turn it off. We're supposed to observe it, right? We're
Yeah.
supposed to observe it and kind of detach from it. But yeah,
Well, that's a
that
good point,
really
because a lot of
helps.
people are trying to get rid of their negative thinking, or they think that they're not good at meditating because they do have the monkey mind. But I
Right.
certainly say this in the book, is that it's always going to be there. And, some days you have, I'm sure this is your reality too, you
Yeah.
have those great days of meditation where you feel blissful and in nirvana. And then other days are just a bombardment of negative thoughts, fearful thoughts. But it's not the point that we reach some state of nirvana every time, if not anytime. It's the fact that we continue the practice throughout the seasons of our life. And it's through the consistency of doing it that we experience the transformation, not in each individual session. And I think that is where people get that wrong. They experience the monkey mind and they think that they're not good at it, so they
Mhm.
give up.
Yeah. And that's part of our left brain indoctrination, in our school systems. And I don't want to go too much into that, but we're taught right and wrong,
Mm,
competition, and you can't fail at meditation, even if you're doing it for 5 seconds. And you
yeah.
can't master it either. You can't become an expert at it because there's always layers to go through. You can't do it. And so people just need to chill and just
Yeah.
just do it. Does that make
But
sense?
it's a great tool, and it's a
It
great
is.
tool in our toolkit that we can use
Hmm.
to raise our vibration. What are other things that maybe that you would share with your clients about raising their vibration? What other things can they bring into their life that will help them with the process?
Well, eating high vibrational foods if possible.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
Live foods as possible. Uh, Cutting out the toxicity and some of the foods that we eat, or that which we sometimes call foods, like sugar and things like that. Um, that helps a lot. Grounding, um, getting out in nature, hugging trees, walk barefoot on the grass. Even in my home, I'm barefooted all the time. When my clients come, I say, "Can you take your shoes off, please?"
So am I, actually. Yeah.
I walk around
Sometimes your feet
barefooted.
get a bit cold, but
Yeah,
it's good to get that connection. Actually, back on diet, which you brought up there,
yeah. Hmm.
I was thinking, I know, I can't remember exactly which book, but Dolores did actually talk about, through this ascension process, that our diets would begin to change, that
Hmm.
our reliance, maybe reliance and heavy food like meats and that, our taste would begin to change as our body began to change. Have you
Hmm.
noticed that yet in your life? Because I know for me, I still do eat meat, maybe not as much as I used to, but I still
Yeah,
do that. I know
yeah.
she talked about moving towards more of a liquid diet, but what are you seeing around people's diets as they're entering this time?
I see probably about 50% of my clients are starting to realize that they don't want the heavy foods as much.
Mm, mm,
And I'm still getting a lot of clients that are addicted to sugar and
mm.
things like that too. And a lot of times, their higher self tells them it's time to cut that out, because it's affecting them. It's affecting their health. Um, but I'm a meat eater. I don't eat as much meat as I used to, but I find that it's something that structurally I need. It's not, that's from a doctor that told me you're the body type that needs to have meat.
Yeah, yeah.
So just really careful about the kinds of meat and how it's raised and things like that. Being mindful of the type of meat that I purchase and eat.
I think it's such an important point that we really are, you know, over our own, but I see this all the time in the spiritual community where people say, it's not spiritual to eat meat. And I've even read books that people say, oh, don't eat meat. And I think, my personal opinion, I think this is crazy because I think that we know our own bodies,
Yes.
and our own bodies have all individual needs. So what is right for one, maybe not right for another, but I certainly feel the importance of that. I know a lot of people in the spiritual community kind of get into this really dogmatic way of thinking. It's this way and it can't be others. If you're spiritual, you can't eat meat or you can't do this. And I really kind of don't like these ways of thinking, because I think that, one, we shouldn't be judging anyone else.
Part of the divisiveness.
Totally. And then two, things are going to be right for us. I mean, I'll even bring this up. I even heard someone saying, well, you're not going to ascend and you're not going to be a part of the new earth if you're eating meat. And I just think things like that are just, crazy talk.
Yeah. Oh boy, we could really get into that.
Yeah.
But we're not going to, because we're going to be on YouTube.
Yeah. Well, and I think these things bring fear about, don't they? Because, if someone's told that they're, I grew up a Christian, and I was brought up with this type of thinking, is that if you don't do this, then
you're
you
going to
will
hell.
not make it, into heaven and stuff. And I see the same kind of divisive language and fear, even in different spiritual traditions, or in kind of what we deem New Age, as people have these kind of concepts. And I think whenever someone is buying into something based on fear, it is the wrong vibration, and that should send off alarm bells right away, because we're not supposed to be guided and led by fear. We're supposed to be guided by our higher selves.
I agree. Drop into your heart and stop listening to everyone else.
Who most inspire? I'm sure I know the answer to this, certainly around Dolores, but who else has inspired you on your spiritual path?
Oh, this is I'm not sure I can answer that, because I don't believe in gurus. Never have. I never have, for
Maybe
some reason.
teacher is the better word to use. Like, who has inspired you with their life, with their message, with their teaching, that's made an impact on your life?
I just have to say, probably Dolores. But
Great.
I started a very directed spiritual journey 35 years ago, and I read a lot of books. I loved Louise Hay. Eckhart Tolle.
Both really inspiring books that both of them have written, and have written a few. And Eckhart's obviously still with us. Louise has passed on, but wasn't she an amazing person and a really forerunner for so many of us? Now I see younger people replicating kind of her same core message, which is pretty simple, is loving the self. But wasn't she just an amazing human being that inspired many of us to be where we are at now spiritually?
I'm thinking back to the very first book I read that really set me on this was the Celestine Prophecy.
I've read that also. And have you seen the movie?
I don't recall. And also another one was The Road Less Traveled by M. Scott Peck. That's dating me for sure.
That's a classic book, that one.
Yes. Yeah. So that was it. But I went through a big dark night of the soul, and that lasted about 8 years. And I would say my higher self was my biggest teacher, in serious humility, letting go of the ego, complete and utter transformation. You wouldn't even recognize me, 10, 15 years ago. So.
Are you comfortable to share a little bit about your journey?
Yeah, sure. A little bit, not everything. There was a catalyst, and I won't go into that, but it rendered me, pretty pretty devastated, and everything in my life went wrong.
Mm,
And I started, as I went through that, in hindsight, I can see what was going on, but at that time, you don't know. I mean, everything's dark. You have no clue what's
mm,
going on.
yeah, sure.
But yeah, I knew I was going through something profound, but I didn't know what it was. I knew it felt deeper than depression, and uh, my higher self said, "No medications, you don't need it." Because I used to be in the psychiatric business a long time ago, and I don't believe in it anymore as much. So I think it does help some people, but people are now working beyond that. Um, but I remember being on the couch one day, exhausted and not. And I remember a voice came to me and said, "Surrender." And I had my little temper tantrum. What do you mean?
As we do, all been there, haven't we? Yeah.
Yeah. And so I just kind of relaxed into that, and I was sort of downloaded how to be mindful. And so it took a few years, but I did pull myself out of it
Mm,
by being mindful, by being present, and just relaxing into it. I kept getting, stop judging. This is bad, you know. And I just felt like there was a point in my soul where I had to make a decision. Am I going to stay in ego or not?
mm.
And it changed me. It absolutely changed me. And I got a lot of tests, and I got very sick, and I'm telling you, Paul, everything went wrong. And talk about hitting rock bottom, you know. But I slowly pulled myself out of it through mindfulness and through gratitude. And
Beautiful.
slowly things started getting better and better and better. And I was like downloading this wisdom, and I'm putting it on Facebook. It just would come, and I would go, "Wow, this is something I need to know too." But I'm writing it, it was teaching me as I was teaching others. And so, and I think too that, and then going into QHHT, I have found that I am, I'm sure a lot of other QHHT practitioners are this way too, is I'm just riddled with all kinds of information when a client comes. And so I'll use that connection to my higher self to ask the questions of the client to help them have those light bulb moments. And that's my gift. I have this
Mm.
ability to see deeply into dynamics and things like that. And then it the whole dark night of the soul helped me realize my gift and my individuality, as well as being part of this wonderful group of people who are very similar.
And we can have, I think there's this misconception, isn't there, that, when we get on the spiritual path, that we shouldn't be facing kind of any darkness or adversity
Oh,
in our life. And I've
yeah.
found, and particularly over the last 18 months, because I think a lot of people will relate to this. We've gone through the dark night of the soul. We've been isolated. Particularly here in Australia, we've been, locked down for
Yeah.
very long periods of time. And we can feel like, it's wrong. But on the other hand, I have found it's the biggest catalyst for growth that we can ever experience is going through adversity.
Yeah.
So even though when we're going through something that is uncomfortable and perhaps painful, we see it as bad, but then on reflection, we can see it in a different light. Is that the way you reflect on that dark night of the soul now, with the
Yeah.
wisdom and understanding that
Uh,
you've gained? Do you see that in a very different way, as more of a gift that
I do, Paul.
you got? Isn't that beautiful that we
I feel
can?
like I went through a rite of passage.
Yeah. And you wouldn't be the person, you are now. You wouldn't have the density of wisdom that you have without that experience, and you wouldn't be able to give to people what you obviously have to give and share with your clients and other people unless you'd gone through that experience. So it is kind of great that we do change our perspective over time.
Yes.
And see, you know, what has been against us become for us in other ways. And I think that is the beauty of life. And to also, it's kind of like a little bit how meditation works, isn't it? Because
yes,
not everything is great. Sometimes it's really hard. Sometimes it's really good. But in the end, it's through the consistency that we see it. And it's through the consistency that we are transformed, and we get this opportunity to be of a higher vibration.
And I always go, that's true. And I always go back to what Eckhart Tolle said is all stress is your resistance to the present moment. And so when I'm, you know, uncomfortable or fearful about something, or, you know, I feel my vibration slipping, I go into, what am I resisting? What am I resisting?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I mean, Eckhart's profoundly, actually, it was the catalyst for my spiritual
Really?
awakening when I
Awesome.
read one of his books, The Power of Now. It was about 10, 12 years ago now. And that really started me down this, you know, way of thinking and being, of recognizing what the ego was and how we can be possessed by the mind in a way, and that we're always either, you know, reflecting on the past or we're projecting into the future. And many of us forget to bring our awareness and focus into the present moment, which is so imperative to experience peace and liberation.
That's the power place. That's where your power is.
Yeah.
And that's the place where you manifest.
And even things, you know, I struggle with, I know you mentioned depression before. It was something that I went through in my own life. And I noticed as well that when we're depressed, we're generally either projecting something and living it in our mind that's going to happen, and it's causing the depression or feeding the depression, or we're, you know, reflecting on what happened and we're feeding on that. But when we actually bring our awareness into the present moment more, we can shift depression. And I think there's been a reliance on just taking this or taking that and, you know, kind of just dealing with it, rather than looking for active ways of how to better, you know, transmute some of this denser energy.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I've got some more questions I wanted to ask you, but how did you actually get started with QHHT?
Oh, wow. That's another story. I was running a spirituality group years ago with a friend, and I was driving there one day, and I was thinking about, you know, what can we do today? How can, you know, what can I teach? What, you know, how's it going to be? And you know, what's the theme? You know, I was thinking of all these things, and then all of a sudden my higher self goes, traditional therapy is going to be obsolete. And I'm like, what? Okay, get in the back seat because I want to have this conversation. So it was imprinted upon me that, traditional therapy is a certain vibration, and it can be very helpful. It can be very helpful for people. But now it's as we awaken, it's going to be obsolete.
It's very three-dimensional, isn't it? It's very
Thank you. I didn't want to say it, but you said it good.
Yeah, well, it's something that I don't think is inherently bad, and I think we can all
No,
gain from different modalities. But I think of it like a computer. When the new model comes along, and you're still using a model from the 80s or 90s, and then you're
right.
in, it'll still work, but it won't have the effectiveness of technology that has been that is far superior to it. And I kind of feel that that's how Dolores has developed QHHT.
I
There's
agree.
quantum, good word and comparison to computing, because I know there's talk of quantum computing, but
Hmm.
there's quantum healing hypnosis technique
Yes.
is so much more advanced
Yes.
than methods of the past, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes. Yes. So, through that experience, I went to a group that night, and this young man shows up. We had a lot of people in that group, and this young man shows up, and I just kind of notice him. Um, and then a while later, he made an appointment with me for a reading. I used to do psychic readings. Well, I do sometimes still, but I don't like calling them psychic readings anymore. It's more intuitive counseling or intuitive guidance. Um, and we hit it off, and he was at a very young age, only 23. He was uh, a master hypnotist, and he knew a lot of people like Neil Donald Walsh, who wrote the books, you know,
Conversations with God.
Conversations with
Yeah,
God,
yeah.
and he was just absolutely brilliant. Long story short, I had a radio show, and he was on it. We had a great chemistry on the radio show, and just the wisest young man I've ever known. Very popular person too. And he told me, you should do hypnosis because you have the voice for it. When I was doing the meditations in group, and I said, oh, I can't do that. Nah, I didn't. And he says, I can certify you. And so we started the process, and suddenly he died, and he was just 23.
Oh, really? How did he pass?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't
Wow.
know, but he was very missed by a lot of people because he was
Oh,
so incredibly profound,
wow.
profoundly wise. He was a much bigger soul for the body he had, right?
Yeah, wow.
And so I mourned that for a while, and he kept he kept entering into my space, and he kept saying, Dolores Cannon, Dolores Cannon, Dolores Cannon. I'm like, who's Dolores Cannon? I don't know who this is. So
Wow.
finally one day I started watching her on YouTube, and the rest is history. That's
Wow.
how I got
So
into it.
how many years has it been now since you've been working as a
Since
practitioner?
um since 2015.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I went to my first class in 2015, not long after Dolores passed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. And
So
I would imagine that you've seen quite a few people
I
in
have.
in that time.
I have. I have. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you this question.
Yeah.
What's one of the, that comes to mind? What is one of the most amazing things that you've seen in a session?
Well, early on, in fact, this was my very first client, and I knew her. Very first QHHT session, and I knew her, and it came out that she was consciousness building a new city on the new earth. And I remember her explaining how buildings are just manifesting, and they were doing it with their minds, and that she was surprised that there were no bulldozers and cranes and
Wow.
people
Yeah.
with hammer and nails. And she said, and then she noticed that there was kind of this veil, And on the other side of the veil are all these people wanting to come in, but the city wasn't ready yet.
Wow.
Isn't that
Wow.
interesting?
Yeah. Well, I mean, manifesting with, using our thoughts is, I guess, this is kind of this a part of all of this quantum world that we're moving into. And I think
Right.
people have known the power of manifestation for a long time, and it's even been questioned whether people were using this way of being with ancient civilizations. And, I'm sure some people have explored all sorts of things around ancient civilizations and how certain things came to be. So it's a really interesting area, isn't it? What
It really is.
the possibilities can be outside of this really narrow band of frequency that we operate in.
Yes.
I went to get my eyes tested the other day because I wear glasses when I read, and the guy was showing me how the eye works, and he did the eye test and was showing me all the nerves and the bundles of nerves at the back of the eye. And it just kind of showed that, perception, travels through nerves, and then it projects this reality that we live in. But, there's such a thin band of reality that we experience, and there is so much more that is possible outside of this band of frequency. But I've been getting this lately. I think that band is beginning to increase, and this is maybe being described in a lot of Dolores's work, that we would begin to experience life in a different frequency than we are at the moment.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So I think it's certainly exciting times, isn't it? I know it can be really discouraging, particularly here in Australia, where we are, we're seeing a lot of extreme things being pushed through. What's your view on that? Why do you think there's a rush to go down a certain trajectory right now? And I would say, specifically what I'm referring to is, there seems to be a push from levels of power to go into what we would probably deem a negative direction.
Yeah.
What do you think the rush is about?
Whew. Well, I think it's a lot of resistance to people waking up, but in what's happening, people are waking up anyway.
Yeah. I think the more you push, the
more you push, the more the opposite pushes back. And some people call it good and evil. Some people call it energy. I don't know what, exactly what it is, but I do think that there is an agenda, and I think that we're headed in the right direction, but we're definitely experiencing the fallout of the destruction of old systems that don't work anymore. People are waking up to those constructs, and I think as a whole, humanity will build new constructs, that are more based in higher frequency living. And
yeah, I totally agree. And I think you can't really have one thing end until another thing emerge, until something has collapsed before. Eckhart Tolle spoke a lot about, because it's interesting, isn't it, that he called his second book A New Earth. And
yes, that was a wonderful book.
And he spoke a lot about this shift in consciousness in a lot of his work, and it ties very closely into the new earth, which Dolores spoke about. Even though they use a little bit of different language, they're describing essentially the same thing. Eckhart, describes it as, the old way of consciousness, and that it's an evolution of consciousness that humanity needs to go through and has always gone through this evolution. But we are actually at the precipice of needing to do this. I know in a lot of his earlier teachings, he said, well, I don't even know if humanity will make it. But I think as time goes on, we can see that clearly we will make it, and we will emerge into a reality that's very different from the one we're experiencing now.
Yes. And also, you've probably heard in the spiritual community that some people are going to be left behind, and I don't believe that.
Yeah. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that, because as I kind of mentioned earlier, a lot of people have fear about that. It's kind of like, in Christianity talks about the rapture of the church, and all the saints get taken away with Jesus, and all the other people get left doomed to suffer and perish in misery. And I think these archetypes really, they don't help us spiritually. All they do is keep us in fear, and we either rebel against that or ignore it. But they don't help our spiritual growth, do they?
No, because it just teaches that the power is outside of ourselves, and it's not. And I think part of what's going on in our world right now is humanity is being given the opportunity to stand up for itself instead of hide.
Yeah.
And if everyone stood up, I don't think we would be experiencing the destruction as much as we are now. And I think everyone needs to stand up.
And I think there are a range of ways we can do that, isn't there? Like, we can do that by going through our spiritual evolution. Meditation is, and they've done a lot of scientific studies now to measure actually this occurring, is when we collectively meditate, we actually can change the environment around us, or if we focus on a particular area, we can actually create physical change that has been scientifically measured. I think they did this actually in a city in America. I don't recall exactly which one, but they measured a group meditation on that city, and they watched in a space of time that the crime rate actually dropped during that period. And there were also a lot of other positive things that were experienced. It's exciting when you hear kind of stuff like that, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. And I think it's, I believe there is such thing as hive mind.
Yeah, totally.
And our media has created, a certain level of belief, a certain level of living. And I think people are waking up to that. And people are beginning to think for themselves. And those that are beginning to really think for themselves are the independent thinkers. They're the ones that are going to herald the good part of the changes happening, I think.
Yeah, I believe that as well. And I think that is, I think we got reason to be optimistic and excited, even though things may seem really dark right now. And I know you're blessed enough to live in a part of the world that is probably experiencing a lot less of these dark things, if you might, happening. Right. But I do believe wholeheartedly that we will traverse and move through this. But we're learning the lessons along the way. And I always like to say that, even though you walk through the valley of the shadow of death, you still need light to cast a shadow. So it's, it's not always as dark as that we maybe are experiencing in the moment, that there's light always that is needed to cast any shadow. It's been such a wonderful time chatting with you today. I've
Thank
really
you.
enjoyed this, and some great information. I know this is going to inspire a lot of people. If people
Awesome.
want to find you, and maybe they live in the Austin area, and I know
Austin,
Texas.
Yeah.
I know Texas is a big state, but do you
Yeah.
have people that travel from different parts to get to you?
I do. And before COVID, I had people from France and
Wow.
other countries, China, France, you know, and people from other states in the union. And yes, so I am in the Austin, Texas metro area, and my website is laurielyons.com.
Perfect.
And
I'll put that on the screen as well, so people can easily see that, and how that's spelt as well. So, and they can just get in contact with you and book in a QHHT session with you. Wonderful.
Yes. And I want to say, as a closing statement, everyone that I work with, the higher self is very, very positive about the future. Very positive about our future.
Beautiful. So, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think that's a beautiful way to end this, is that just giving people hope. It's one of the main reasons I wanted to talk to you today, is just to instill hope, because I think you'd have to be living under a rock somewhere to not be, you know, experiencing some of the denser energies that are actually, it's not that they're in the future, they are in our reality right now. And there's some quite egregious, you know, particularly here in Australia, legislation that's trying to get pushed through, egregious, that would have huge implications on people's lives, and creating, through the fear of punishment, and even imprisonment, to do some basic things. So that is really powerful. Can you just reiterate that again? Because
yes. And you know, all these clients, they don't even know each other, and their higher self is coming through and talking about the new earth, and talking about the positive changes coming. But and that, you know, I don't know much about this, but I've heard, you know, that there's been galactic wars, and that the good side is won, and that we're just seeing all the cleanup and the aftermath of it all. And sure, you know, sometimes in war there are casualties, but overall I do believe that, and I'm being told this by my clients every day, you know, that things are going to get better, and they're going to get better soon.
Yeah, I believe it. And I think that is a great way to end this. And it's thank you so much. And we'll have to do this again, because
I would love it.
I really enjoyed it. And I'm so glad people will be able to find you. And
thank you. And your Audible book and everything else that you're doing.
Yeah, well, it's I'm so glad to have, you know, the opportunity to help people through this dense time. But as you say, we're going to get through it. We're going to get to the other side, and there's going to be a very beautiful reality for us to explore on the other side.